Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Hi, it's Jonathan Goldhill, and welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. My guest today is a globally respected expert in family offices, family firms, and family enterprises, and manages the Family Business Audiocast, a leading media platform hosting conversations with industry leaders around the globe. R. Adam Smith is a veteran strategic advisor, founder, board leader, financier, and deal maker with extensive experience in guiding global private companies, family offices, and investors. Since the mid-1990s, he's been pivotal in over 50 venture and private equity-backed companies, handling billions in transactions. Founder of several companies, including Circle Peak Capital LLC and Wisdom Board Inc., Adam excels in mergers, acquisitions, boards, and private equity investments. A high honors MBA alumnus of the Graduate School of Business at Columbia University, Adam's leadership extends to over a dozen boards and advisory boards, reflecting his expertise in strategy, governance, culture, leadership, planning, and finance. And Adam actively contributes to the educational, health, music, and philanthropic sectors, embodying a commitment to giving back while doing good. Adam, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Jonathan. So good to be here. I've really enjoyed your show, and it's a pleasure and honor. Thank you.
Yeah, well, hey, let's start with, we'll tell people a little bit about your audio cast that you're doing, the Family Business Audiocast. It's relatively new, and just why don't you tell people a little bit about, so we can introduce guests and they can go listen to your show.
Yeah, thank you. Well, like your show, probably you start as a hobby, an idea, and you start with one episode and think it's just going to be a small thing or hobby and someone you know. And it grows from there. Previously, I had produced another 30 or 40 podcasts with Wisdom Board and some board and C-suite relationships. So it was a good experience to do that during COVID, and that was obviously the initial Zoom days. Nowadays, on LinkedIn, I have quite a large network, but I also like to share it and create more of a thought leadership dialogue around different topics. My personal passion is the family enterprise, or the family firm, or business of families, whatever you might call it. Not just the family office itself, which we can talk about more. But now we just are finishing our, we're getting to our 25th episode in a year at the Family Business Audiocast. That is all on LinkedIn. And then, as yours is, and most podcasts, then they are professionally produced and distributed to the world. So it's really no longer right. So it's at Family Business Audiocast on LinkedIn.
Okay.
When the episode is complete, maybe a couple of weeks later, it comes out, and there's hyperlinks to the global channels. And then, of course, they're on the podcast channels themselves. Essentially, it's a thought leadership hub for all experts within family enterprises and family firms to listen either live or later and talk about succession, merger and acquisitions, investing, governance, culture. So all the things that we'll talk about. So it's going quite well. It's fun. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. Well, we're going to cover a lot of content, and we've got a short amount of time today. So I might rush you through a little bit, but let's start with some of the unique dynamics of family enterprises. Either what's your fascination with family enterprises, family firms, or what do you think's the unique dynamics and that maybe draws you to them anyway?
It seems like everybody has their own personal stories and reasons to be involved in a family business, whether they're in one or not. I have been part of my family businesses or learning from them or observing from them. I started my own businesses over the years with family offices investing with me as a limited partner or general partner or a board member. So there was a proximity, both in my case, to being part of family business within my family, and then having family offices, which money comes from a family business, ultimately become a partner of mine going way back initially to 2002, and then some institutional family offices starting investing with me and my partnerships around 2005. So since then, I believe that the broader thesis here, the broader message, I think, for me philosophically, is that the family enterprises around the world, which are quite large, they really have a unique position to maintain the legacy of their family, but also of their business. And that business affects not just their legacy and their wealth, but affects the community itself. And it affects the employees internally. So there's the exogenous factor around the family business, and there's the internal factor within the family business. And I think it's important, not just as a banker or as a lawyer or an investor or an accountant, as we learn more about the family office space, to really keep in mind the scale of these family enterprises and their importance to their community and their employees and their people beyond the corporate entity itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, family offices have really gotten the buzz. I don't think it was a term that I heard of 10 or 20 years ago. And yet they were around, right? The Rockefellers, the Ford,
Sure.
all these large organizations that had foundations and were making investments into the community, they existed. But it's really trickled down to a lot of smaller families. And so it's an interesting dynamic that you're playing in. Let's move on to the subject of governance in family businesses, because I think this is something that multi-generational businesses, multi-generational family businesses have in place. But often when it's just the same generation or just two generations, they don't have this governance structure in place. So I want to tap into your wisdom around what you think are the best practices for establishing effective governance structures, starting with when do you put these in place? When do you put things like family councils and advisory boards and bring in independent directors? Is it a size function? Is it how many family members function? Is it we're having difficulty in our strategic planning sessions, agreeing on
Right.
stuff? What's your take on this?
It depends, as we all say, right? It's kind of a mess because there is no answer to that that I've found yet from the experts in the industry compared to other industries where there's more norms. Those norms are disrupted. Speaking about disruption, and your approach to thinking about succession planning and those type of evolution matters. So I think that the governance should happen as soon as possible, and it happens at multiple levels. Sorry, I have an old grandfather clock going on, so that's any of you interested in this now.
We don't hear, so it's all right.
Okay. So first of all, governance is super important only to the extent that the family cares about it. Mm-hmm. Number two, when there is governance, it does tend to start with G1 and the charter and the mission, and that relates to legacy, and that relates to the sort of bylaws as an analogy to corporate governance as opposed to family corporate governance. I think the bylaws and the charter are super important, and those can be disrupted over the generations as well. That gets quite messy at times. So you have to have lawyers, and you have to have advisors, and you have to have independent directors. So thirdly, I think that even though there are more subtleties around the family business or family enterprise governance, still, the board of directors really is super important. I see it as the primary interface of fiduciary duty when I'm dealing with them on a merger acquisition or recapitalization or some sort of liquidity event. Ultimately, if there is any sense of governance and fiduciary duty for the family or for investors, perhaps, the board of directors is still essential. And as you know, of course, we can talk about that further, but it's important to have an odd number of members, ideally, on the board of directors, and at least 3, maybe 5 or 7. So
Not more, please.
not more. And I would say also, I have had the privilege, purposefully, of having academics and authors and writers and professors and think tank institute heads on the Family Business Audiocast on purpose, so that they can share and give that knowledge beyond the just the transaction level itself, at a much higher level of academic and fiduciary and governance matters from their point of view.
Yeah, it's my experience that things like a family constitution, or even contemplating putting in some governance structure, doesn't happen until either G3 comes along, or there's multiple G2 members, and maybe there's cousins. So you've got maybe 2 brothers, for instance, start a business, and then their sons or children, could be daughters, come into the business. So now you've got cousins. That's when it starts to get a little bit, I'll use a technical term here, gnarly. When it gets gnarly, then you need to probably put these things in place. But otherwise, if it's just closely held with just within one family, nuclear family, then it seems like they're not ready for it. Would you agree?
That's true. There's an inflection point there of complexity that can come from various catalysts. I think the first catalyst for change, for disruption, for needing to do hard work, right, and get out of the gnarly phase is like, are we going to sell our company? Mm-hmm. Are we going to sell our baby? Do we need cash flow? Are we tired of running this? Is there not a successor? Is management not doing well? Is the industry being disrupted, sort of from cash cow into, well, it's not a cash cow anymore. Let's really move on. And relative to, what is the succession planning relationship to owning that business? As a side note, I have a guest coming up, Tom Deans, who's one of the most prolific speakers in the world, over 1,900 speeches on family business, and his 3rd book, and he's my guest in August or so. So I was on a panel with him with Family Business Center talking about succession. So in his point of view, it's an interesting point to make, is that the inflection point of a family business being sold is very complex, as you say, because of governance, also, which may or may not be there. Also, it's a big emotional decision, and it's a big financial decision. The reason I mentioned Tom Deans, for those that are interested to watch the episode and listen and read about him, is that he has an interesting approach that says, if you really want to avoid the mess of succession and dealing with all the complexity of governance, then one thing to do is ask your children, the G2, to buy the family business with their own wealth from the family, and see if they want to actually buy that at a fair market value. So it's an interesting analogy and an interesting thing to think about. And I can see it happening more and more in the market.
It's interesting because oftentimes I don't think of family businesses as people who want to sell their business. They want to keep it within the family. They want to transfer ownership either through their lifetime gift tax exemption or children buying in. And in smaller companies, what I see is that the parents want to just take an earnout in the form of a W-2 paycheck for like an indefinite period of time.
Interesting.
I was with a group of small business owners. They were all part of a group called Sons of Bosses last night, and there were 10 of them, and most of their parents were still on the payroll. I was like, W-2 income is the worst income you could get. Like, get dividend and distribution income. Okay, so moving on from that. So succession planning and preparing the next generation. So this is obviously
Mm,
what my book is about. It's about leveling up the next generation leaders' skills in leadership so that the predecessor, typically the owner, can have confidence that the new CEO is going to be able to lead the company without betting the farm, to use like an old phrase, and messing things up. Messing the income stream, messing the value of the company up, or um,
mm.
it certainly disrupts. It's disruptive to the owner and predecessor because their role starts changing. They no longer are the top boss, and they're having to take orders maybe from their child. Um, what are
Yes.
and so my book is basically about putting a playbook in place
Okay.
and trying to create a dialogue between the two generations so they understand, so they can resolve and manage conflict, because
Mm.
this is, it's oftentimes the identity of each of these individuals that comes into conflict with each other. But
Well, I did get your book actually yesterday, so I'm
okay,
excited to read it. I started skimming it, and like many things with complex clients and transactions and wealth and the ego and pride, or fear that goes along with these major businesses and making decisions that change those businesses, especially if you're selling it, for example, or merging it, or liquidating it, or transferring it. These are major decisions. I think they're all quite complex. On the one hand, I think all of us as normal people, as advisors, as not of the family office, we have to respect that the wealth was built over many decades or centuries and with hard work. So to to maintain a appreciation for capitalism, and that wealth is built within the capitalistic context and with hard work, even though it might seem excessive, even though it might get messy, even though people might complain, even though the solutions might not be so fluid. I frankly think for all of us it's important to step back and think, well, how did you get there with 100 million sales or value or a billion? And to respect that and say, okay, no matter how you're going to sell or recap or distribute or share or transfer or set aside trusts or what have you, or revenue sharing distribution programs, it does come from wealth that was hard earned. So that's the first point I would make. The second point,
just if I can just recap,
yes,
paying homage to the history
yes,
that came before you, and not being a cocky adolescent punk, so to speak, and think that you can do it better.
well,
It's
I hear, yes, I say this because I'm reading more books and articles and see other advisors, whether it be bankers or lawyers or deal makers. I think it's just important, which I try to do, is to keep that perspective of respect and appreciation and sort of sometimes awe, and just to focus on their goals, as opposed to sort of judging what is there or the decisions they're making. Ultimately, a lot of the decisions, like you're saying, succession or tax structuring or sharing or transferring, like they're not going to be necessarily sound decisions. They
Mhm.
might be unfair, they might be emotional, but really, I think as advisors, as opposed to being in the family, being advisors, let's say as a coach, as a board member, as a banker, as a lawyer, I think we have to just wanted to say, I think we all should keep in mind that it's really our business is to serve and to advise and not to judge. But
100%.
the other point is, in terms of avoiding conflict, is before the conflict occurs, which is why lawyers are important, and private bankers and accountants also, less so bankers, is to have transparency and force and encourage that transparency. And a lot of family business and family office experts write about transparency. And I think it's important that we also think about that concept and that importance and that medium of transparency, which comes prior to conflict and can mitigate conflict, and still getting that transparency to work is quite hard because it requires courage and to create a dialogue that is simultaneous with ego. So it's quite challenging. I think that's where lawyers and private bankers and independent directors can come into play.
Yeah, and at the same time, you have to balance the family values and the business goals. And maybe, just maybe, some of the outside advisors don't pay enough respect to the family values, and because our perspective is oftentimes looking at it from a business and treating it like it's an asset, it's a business, it's sold, it can be sold, it can be transferred.
The commercial side.
Yeah. And so, one of my future guests is going to be talking about conflict in family businesses. And his aim is to keep the continuity of the family intact. And it's a strong bias towards that based on his perspective. My perspective has been a strong bias towards, does this make sense as a business? And let's look at this, let's detach the family from it. But you can't. You have to balance these two. So what are your thoughts on how to align the family values and legacy with the strategic objectives and operational demands of the business?
Well, my primary role is a banker, and has been as an investor. So as a banker or as an investor, it's not so much about alignment. I think it's more about doing a good job and getting the work done that is sought after by the client, and whether it's seems correct or not. But if you look at the alignment internally, let's say in terms of being efficient, being correct, being best practices. So let's just say best practices is an important concept in all of corporate governance, the theory of the corporation, building companies that last, creating governance, making the right decisions. I think the points you're making relate almost to leadership in a way that we all learned from John Maxwell and the veterans, going back to not just the Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and Jack Welch, but like really the concept of leadership is based on bringing the best ideas to the table all the time and doing the best you can. And sometimes, those ideas really are not welcomed, or needed, or not appreciated, or they're not essential to the inner workings you're talking about, because they have other ideas, like you said, around continuity or legacy or just cash flow or having fun or having power. So my response would be that as advisors, as people getting involved in these organizations, it can be at the governance level, can be at the advisor level, can be at the transaction level. Super essential, I think, to look at every case differently, keep an open mind, and respect, where they come from, where they're going, and give our best ideas ultimately. But if the family is seeking advice from an advisor, obviously they're paying for that advice. Give them the best ideas possible, and they're going to make the decision they want to make at the end of the day.
Okay. Well, you used the word correct a few times, so I want to go back to that. And that presumes that you and I and people like us know what is correct. We definitely know what's best practices because we've read the book, we've studied it, we've seen it in practice, we know it works. Can you think of a case as you go back and look at your career and maybe recent companies that you've advised? Can you think of a time when there was conflict between advisors and the family, or when there was conflict between what you were suggesting and what the family business was thinking, and it was just really difficult to balance the preserving family harmony, prosperity, and outside advisors giving input? I think these are
Yeah.
really instructive for us when we think
Mhm.
about these and think, okay, wow, that was great learning. What would we do in a different next time or differently?
Right. It's sort of like a Harvard Business School case study in a way
Yeah.
of a reality check. I have
Yeah.
a couple of examples that I've heard and learned from and even addressed on the Family Business Audiocast that are very similar to situations I've been in. So one example could be, um, how to manage the cash. So one situation was there's the
That's a good
um,
one.
G1 founder sitting on, let's say, 100% of the wealth in their 60s. They want to sell, and that sell will result in capital gains tax rate and will result in a significant distribution. And then they would distribute that wealth accordingly to the shares already set up in the trust and in the bylaws. Um, However, even though that's quite typical, G2, the son, um, although he did not want to buy the business from his father at fair market value, let's say 10 times EBITDA is a good number, quite expensive, and maybe there's a difference of view of value, or there's a certain psychological privilege that suggests that maybe it should be at a significant discount as an insider transaction,
Right.
which is perfectly fine within a private company as well.
Right.
Um, but anyway, in that case, the G2 really didn't want that transaction to happen. He wanted to build the company further in a way that was, you were talking about human capital and succession planning and so on. So I think what's happening and really affects the M&A business and the investment banking business and the transactions and all the lawyers and all the accounts, all the fair market value, and all the decisions around what's correct or best, as you said. And what's really best is whatever happens is what's best. So in this case, G2 convinced the father to not sell and instead to go through the laborious process of bringing in advisors, bringing in a new CEO, bringing in some investors / capital. It can be debt or equity, and then actually say, hey, um, you want the owner wants to decrease their stress and wants to increase their wealth and move on. But sometimes the children don't want to let go of the legacy, or they like the business, they want to build it because they know it best. In that case, I think we'll see more of this next generation. If they're not looking to go to the beach and they don't have interest in other things, they know what they know best with the family business. And occasionally and increasingly, I think they're going to want to stay in that business, recap the business, and then turn the volume up and build it, because that is a very valuable asset to be in and know. And that's interesting to me, because then that means that business is going to be augmented and do deals, raise equity, raise debt, buy things, sell things, refinance, build governance, build a legacy, build human capital, hire executive recruiters, build a brand, make an impact. So, that's the most interesting part of the industry for me.
Sure. So, folks like you talk about getting a second bite of the apple, meaning that they sell the apple once, but they hold on to a certain portion of it, and then it grows bigger and they get a juicier bite the next time around. But in the story that you just told, this person in their 60s might have said to themselves, no, I don't really want that. I'd really rather take more now. And um, I don't want to wait until there's a second distribution, a second liquidity event.
Hmm.
That's some of the conflict right there. I would imagine you've had to encounter this in your career.
I've seen it. I try to avoid conflict as much as possible by being ahead of it,
Right.
and also to embrace the conflict when it's inevitable, and just to hold on to it and plow through it and get to the end, because sometimes it won't be avoidable.
Yeah, understood. So I know we're kind of closing in on a half hour, and we need to watch our time. So looking at remaining topics that we might cover, like exit planning or building resilience,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Let's
you
talk
know,
about resilience briefly.
yeah,
I we can look at that in different ways, but I think resilience is an interesting word because it overlaps with legacy
Mm-hmm.
and connecting the resilience of continuity and the desire to stick with it and build a company, even though it's hard, even though the competitive pressures are hard, even though the governance is not clear. There's fighting within the ownership, perhaps. Certainly, I don't know if the conflict will be solved, but I like to think about resilience because a lot of the times these businesses are commercial animals that act their own way, regardless of who owns them. It doesn't matter that they're a family business. It doesn't matter that a billionaire owns them. It doesn't matter if they have 12 sons and daughters or have governance or not, or have a legacy or not. I think that the last thing I would say is that even though the family business ecosystem in total is likely to be over half of global GDP, in some countries it's 60, 70, 80%. At the same time, we want to keep an eye out on the ability for that company to survive just as a company. So what do you think about that?
Yeah. So I think that when I think of resilience, I think that there's a lot of factors that weigh in. I think that people have to think in terms of like do a sweat or SWOT analysis and look at what's going on in terms of their products, their services, and the relevancy of them and how they need to be updated. And I think that that creates sometimes some crisis within a family because that change in and of itself can lead to different strategic directions. I think too many business owners that I deal with, because of their size, are not paying attention so much to the outside economic forces. They're not clued into. Most of them aren't affected
Exactly.
by regulatory, changes, political laws, legislation. But these are things that it's hard for them to get outside of their business long enough to really pay attention to this kind of stuff. And so there's resilience from what you referred to earlier as exogenous factors, which is what I've just been talking about. And then there's resilience internally. A family member maybe develops a drug addiction or is married to a spouse that is creating a lot of tension in the family, or someone's struggling with depression, or so there's that internal resilience that I think people need to work on. And it's difficult to think about doing both. Like I'm going to get outside my business and find out what's really going on. And meanwhile, I'm going to deal with that depression that's like been with me since childhood. And, or my ADHD behavior that is disruptive sometimes in the business. I mean, so I think resilience is a multifaceted word. We could have an entire show probably just around it in and of itself. So, Adam, I know you need to go, and I want listeners to be able to know how to reach you, where to access you if they want to.
Okay.
What is it that you'd like them to know about you that we haven't covered?
No, it's super kind. I would like to talk to you more about resilience because when I think of in the future, because when I think of what we're doing as business people, as investors, as bankers, ultimately as a family office, often the hardest question to ask is why do we do certain things? What is our true north? What is our passion? What is our purpose? So I think why relates to resilience in the sense of why do I keep working so hard at this family company or this family business? And I think that's very helpful for people to remember that question, no matter what role you're in. I can be reached at R. Adam Smith on LinkedIn. R. Adam Smith is my handle. Family Business Audiocast is on LinkedIn. It can be followed. We have a very simple newsletter, comes out every 2 weeks. The audiocast every 2 weeks. There's also some expert contributors from academics and think tanks and professors and authors that comes out every month or so. That's all in the Family Business Audiocast. And on the banking side, I lead a family office and private equity mergers business at Solomon Brothers. So we're at SolomonBros.com. And I recently brought that firm back to life. So it's super exciting. And it's wonderful to cover and talk to family offices and family businesses, even though there is messiness along the way, and it keeps it very exciting. So I think it's a wonderful industry filled with interesting, dynamic, complicated, wealthy, interesting people doing complicated things. And that's what I like about it, and ultimately provide ideas and advice that make it easy for them to get to where they want to get to.
Great. R. Adam Smith, not to be confused with other Adam Smiths, maybe some that go back in history. So thanks so much for being with me today, and for with our listeners. And folks, if you got some value from this, please share it with others. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for future episodes of the Disruptive Successor Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful, so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.